We live?
You're live.
Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Menthorn. I'm with the Intertribal Agriculture Council, and today we welcome Dallas Mount. He's the CEO of Ranch Management Consultants from Wheatland, Wyoming. And we will go ahead and start this session. If you have any questions, please type them in the live Q&A box, and we will relay the questions to Dallas. He said as needed. So take it away, Dallas.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. Good to be with you guys today. We're going to talk about the economic leverage of grazing management, getting good at your grazing to really hit the gas on the business aspect of the ranch. There's a lot of good reasons to be a good grazing manager, to take care of the land and to build soil health and all those things. But there's also a lot of business reasons to get good at grazing management. And so that's where we're going to hit it from. So as Catherine said, I run a company called Ranch Management Consultants. And let me give you just a little bit of background on what we do. We do two main things. One of the things we do is teach a school called the Ranching for Profit School. Ranching for Profit is a 7-day business management school for people involved in agriculture. And it's based on the idea that knowing how to raise livestock is not the same thing as knowing how to run a business that raises livestock. Really, they're two entirely different things. And most of us that grew up in agriculture are really good at knowing how to raise livestock, right? About getting cattle bred, getting calves on the ground, doctoring the sick ones, doing all those things. But that doesn't mean that we're going to be successful in the agricultural business, right? So just knowing how to raise livestock or grow crops or those things doesn't mean that your business is going to be profitable. So we help people who are good at the production side of things figure out how to be good at the business management side of things. So all the things that you feel like maybe nobody ever taught you how to do, right? How do you put together a good mission and vision for your business? How do you get people on the same page? How do you build a team that really gets people and fired up and engaged? How do you do cash flows? How do you do economic projections? All those pieces of running a business that does agriculture. So that's what we do. We teach that in the Ranching for Profit School. The second thing that we do is we run a program called Executive Link. Executive Link is based on the idea that when you're self-employed, you work for a lunatic. Okay? And why do we say that? Well, when you work for a lunatic, you work for somebody that lets you do the things that you're good at and the things that you enjoy, when oftentimes the things that really need to be done are left undone. So Executive Link, what we do there is we put graduates of the Ranching for Profit School on boards of directors for each other, and they look inside each other's business and they give each other strategic advice. And then they meet 3 times a year and they hold each other accountable for the things that they said they were going to do. So you leave each EL meeting with an action plan. And then the first thing you do when you come back together is you put that action plan on the wall and you report against it. So you said, here's what I said I was going to do when I left the last meeting. Here's what I've actually done. So it builds that network of people looking inside your business, helping you develop strategic plans and set strategy for your ranch. But then it also helps hold you accountable to doing the things that really need to be done in your business. So those are the two main things that we do. And this is just a snapshot of the folks that attended Ranching for Profit during our last school season from 2019 through here just a few months ago. We just finished a school in Abilene, Texas that is not on this map, but that just kind of gives you an idea of our client base. Most of our clients kind of stretch in the central part of the U.S., from Canada to Mexico, but we do pick up clients from all over the U.S., as you see. So that's what we do. Here's our upcoming list of schools. We just actually filled billings this morning, but we do have a wait list that we expect to, as people decide they can't come for COVID or other reasons like that, we'll be working off that wait list. But we will be offering schools in quite a few different regions here in the next month. So. All right, well, let's dive into it. So economic leverage of grazing management. A friend of mine, Burke Tykert, who really is a friend and a mentor, Burke ran the ranches for Deseret Land and Cattle Company for years. And Burke said in some writings that he did, he said, I think we need a new paradigm for ranchers. And a paradigm can be described as a way of seeing the world or a viewpoint. Okay? And he said that paradigm is, that he suggests as a new paradigm is soil first, then grass, and then animals. So if you were like me and raised with animals as kind of the first thought, right? When you go to visit a ranch, when you got to see the ranch, oftentimes we went and we saw the animals, and that was the first thing we saw and we talked about. Well, as you understand what really drives that ranch, we start looking at the grass and the plants on that surface. And now Burke is suggesting we even need to go a level deeper and really appreciate what's going on in the soil and learning from that. So I know you guys had Nicole Masters as one of the keynotes for the conference, and she's a brilliant person at helping us understand what's going on in the soil and all the biology in there. So I think this presentation dives right into that. We need to look beyond the animals, right? The animals are really the combine or the machine that harvests this crop into something that we can market. So let's start paying attention to really the crop or what we're growing. Okay. So we're going to work today's discussion on this based off a letter and a scenario. So here's the scenario that we're going to work from. And I've got my marking pen here that I'm going to make some notations with, so you guys can see that. Okay, dear RMC, I want to make this ranch work for me and my daughter's family who want to continue to ranch with us. We currently run about 400 cows, mother cows, but there just isn't enough left over to support two families. We figured the gross margin on the cows. Now, if you're interested in what a gross margin is, we're going to get into that in the next session we do. So gross margin. We figured the gross margin on the cows to be about $425 per cow. Okay, those two numbers are important. And we think that's pretty good in this current market. And they're right. That is really good in today's market. They say we run a lean ranch, but our annual overheads are still about $225,000 a year. Okay? So you can think of that $225,000. That's the cost of keeping the doors open on the ranch for the year. So that might be owner wages. That might be wages for all the employees there. That's going to be their land tax, any land rental payments. That's going to be all the repairs on any machines that they're using. So that's just the money that's going to go out the door just to keep the doors open on the ranch. Okay? So that leaves us about $55,000 short of covering overheads at the current margins. Okay. So every year this ranch is operating, they're saying they're coming up about $55,000 short. They're going backwards. Now we follow graze half, leave half. Okay. Now some of you might have heard that before. It's common to hear grazing experts say, well, a rule of thumb is graze half, leave half, right? So half the feed in the pasture we're going to put in the belly of our grazing animals, and the other half we're going to leave out there for wildlife to use for the soil health. So there's some problems with graze half, leave half, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So this ranch says we follow graze half, leave half, and in the summer we run 4 bunches, rotating them through our 20 permanent pastures. Okay. So if we ran into these folks and we said, well, what kind of grazing do you do? They would do rotational grazing, right? So they have 20 pastures and they have 4 bunches of cattle. So we could assume about 50 head in each bunch, rotating through those 20 permanent pastures. Okay. So from a grazing standpoint, it sounds like they're probably doing a lot of things right. Okay. But we're going to dive into this and see. I can't figure out why most of my neighbors can support 2 families on a ranch our size, and we can't seem to make it work. What are we missing? Okay. So let's dive into this a little bit. Now, some numbers I want to walk through with you here. First of all, they have 400 cows. Okay. And each of those cows are making a gross margin of $425 a cow. Okay. That's the gross margin per cow. Now you can think of that gross margin as that's the money that's generated to pay overheads, and then anything after overheads would be profit. Okay. So if we do the 400 cows times the $425, okay, then that means they're generating $170,000. Okay. $170,000 is what those cows are generating, but you see their overheads are $225,000 a year. So obviously that leaves them short of covering those overheads. Okay. So let's see if we can figure out how to help them out here. Now they gave us a couple other clues, 4 bunches rotating through 20 permanent pastures. Let's go to a blank screen. Okay. So we have 20 pastures. Okay. And we have 4 herds. And now we're going to have to make some assumptions. They didn't give us all the information here, but let's assume they're feeding hay for about 2 months out of the year. Okay. And so that would leave them about 300 days of grazing. Okay. All right. So if we have 20 pastures and 4 herds, then how many pastures per herd do we have? All right. Well, we'd have about 5 pastures per herd. Okay. Now we don't know where they're ranching and what the growing season is, but let's assume it's one graze through each of those pastures. Okay, so we spend one time a year through each of those, and we don't come back and regraze them. Okay, so if we have 5 pastures per herd and we have 300 days of grazing, so 300 days divided by the 5. I'm running my calculator here as we're doing this. Gives me 60 days is my average graze period. Now we don't know. Some of these pastures might be bigger than others, but we're just looking for some assumptions to work through. So 60 days, if the animals are in each pasture for 60 days, and then they go on to the next one, and they don't come back till the next year, that would be a 60-day graze period at each pasture. Okay? Now let's think about what their pastures probably look like and what's going on from a grass health, soil health perspective. Okay, so let's say there's a pasture that they're grazing in, and we're going to put a water point right in the middle. Okay? And I know not all pastures are like that, but let's say just for discussion's sake that's the way this is set up. Okay, so now we need let's turn the cows in there for 60 days. Okay? And we're going to let the cows graze in there for 60 days. And at the end of the 60 days, we're going to take a ride through this pasture, starting at this corner here. Okay. And then we're going to ride right through this pasture and look down at the grass and ride right by the water and then ride out to this corner out here. What is it going to look like? What are those grasses going to look like? Where are they going to be most heavily used? Okay. Well, obviously right around the water point, right? Assuming there's no vegetation or terrain or things like that are affecting this. So around the water point, it's going to be fairly heavily grazed. Wouldn't you agree? Okay. And then towards those back corners that are quite a ways from the water point, it might be very lightly grazed. So here around the water point, we might have just some short little plants that have been grazed maybe 2 or 3 or even 4 times that growing season, right? And they're going to be fairly short because they keep getting rebitten. And then we get back out here to this corner, and we're probably going to have some tall plants that haven't been grazed this season, maybe the season before, and maybe the season before that. Okay, so we've got a mix of overgrazing and undergrazing occurring in the same pasture, don't we? And I'm going to draw some brown in here because it's probably got last year's feed as well, sticking up in those same grass plants. Okay? So when you talk about graze half, leave half, that's kind of what they're doing, right? They're grazing 100% of this grass, and they're leaving 100% of this grass. Okay, so graze half, leave half doesn't necessarily work because they might be leaving half the total grass in the pasture. But from a plant perspective, these plants are seeing too much grazing, and these plants are not seeing enough. Okay, they would be healthier if they were grazed more. Okay, so what's going on here isn't real healthy. And we've got 5 groups of cattle grazing across all these. Now, if we wanted to get technical on here, the term we would use is harvest efficiency. Okay. And rangeland ecologists use the term harvest efficiency to represent the percent of the total forage that gets in the belly of a grazing animal. Okay, the total percent of the total forage that gets in the belly of a grazing animal. Okay. Now, in a situation like what we're describing here, the person might say, well, we're grazing half and we're leaving half. But if we looked at harvest efficiency, what's actually going on here is about a 25% harvest efficiency. Okay, about 25% of the total feed that grew that year is ending up in the belly of a grazing animal. Okay, so we need to work to improve this harvest efficiency and make this land healthier. Okay, so let's do that together. Let's talk about changing some strategies about how we might graze this. Now, we've got a few tools to look at here. First thing we want to start off with is this number of pastures and the number of herds. Okay? It's fairly expensive to add more pastures, isn't it? Because we have to put in water, we have to build fence, all those kind of things in order to add more pastures. But we could combine herds, couldn't we? Now, there's certainly a downside to that. If we've got different groups of animals that we want to manage in different ways, we've got our heifers we want to manage, or all these different things, that's going to create some challenges there. But there's real benefit to doing it as well. Okay? So let's get a blank piece of page to work with here, and let's say we stuck with our 20 pastures, okay? But we were able to take those 4 herds and turn them into 2 herds. So we made some sacrifices in terms of managing some groups of cattle and put them together. Now, maybe we could go down to 1 herd. That would be even better. But maybe for now, we're just going to go down to 2. Okay. And in our pasture, what are we probably going to have to work on in order to combine herds? Probably that water right there. We're going to need to be able to support more cattle or whatever animals we're grazing with that water source. So we might need to develop some storage. We might need to develop some recharge capacity so that it fills up faster. Okay, but for some way, we're going to want to water a larger group of cattle. Okay. Now, as we started looking at this, we said, you know what? I don't think we're going to be able to make the progress that we want to make by just combining herds. But might there be some ways to divide up some of these pastures in economical ways to give us even more pastures? So let's say we decided we could do that, and we're going to cross fence these pastures. I'm going to build in a water gap right here. Okay, and I'm going to put in a cross fence. So we're going to graze on this half, and then we're going to be able to flop those animals through and graze on this half. Okay. So now instead of having 20 pastures per herd, we're going to do that with each of the pastures on the place. And so now we have 40 pastures and 2 herds. Okay? So we now have 20 pastures per herd. Okay. Now that's going to give us do a lot of good for us. So if we're still grazing for the 300 days, okay, but now we have 20 pastures. Okay. So 300 divided by the 20. Okay, that gives us a 15-day graze period. All right. So let's do that same thing. Now we've got twice as number of the cattle in here. So before we had 50 head in a bunch, right? We had those 400 head and 4 bunches. Okay. So now we have those 400 head in 2 bunches. Okay. So now we have 200 head in a bunch. So we've got 200 head in here, and instead of being in here for 60 days, they're going to be in here for 15 days. So let's take a ride through this pasture at the end of that 15 days and look down and assess what this looks like. Now, I want you to draw out how these animals would look as they're grazing in here for those 15 days. Okay, well, they're certainly going to be close to the water, but now I've got 200 head in here. Wouldn't you agree that they're going to look a bit more like this in the way that they're grazing that than they did before? Okay. And what we call that is higher stock density. Okay, so the stocking rate is really the same, but the stock density we're pushing up. Okay, so now as we ride through here and look down at these grasses, what are you going to see as we ride across here and look down? Okay. Aren't the plants going to be grazed in a more uniform way, where we're not having so much overgrazing and undergrazing happening side by side? We're still going to have some pretty heavy grazing pressure up here, perhaps. Kurt? But we get out in the rest of this, and we'll have some more uniform. Is there a question?
Kurt, we have a question. How many acres in a pasture and how many cows in the herd?
And the answer is it all depends. If we've got a group of 10 cows, we might have to have little pastures that are a third of an acre or less, right? If we've got a group of 1,000 cows, we might be talking about one section pastures. So the answer is it's all going to depend on the productivity of the land. It's going to depend on the scale of the ranch that they're operating. What we're looking at here is we're talking about principles, and these principles apply no matter what the scale and no matter what the environment. So in any environment, if we increase stock density, which is what we're talking about here, running those animals, increasing stock density, running more, my marker just went berserk here, running more animals in a given area for a shorter period of time, it's always going to increase the uniformity of use. Yeah. So it's a principle that can be applied no matter what the scale. So thank you, Catherine. Any other questions?
Not currently.
All right. Okay. So we've got more uniform grazing. Now let's think through here what could be going on in more parts of this system. So we talked about the graze period. We're going to be in there for 15 days instead of 60. So before we had this, let's say this is an area that gets 6 months of growing season and 6 months of dormant season. Okay. So we essentially have 180-day growing season. Okay, some of you guys might have a lot longer, some of you might have a lot shorter. Before we were in there with animals for 60 days, weren't we? So that means we had a 120-day recovery period. I'm going to abbreviate that, recovery period. So that's essentially the time that those plants are allowed to grow without the presence of grazing animals. Okay? So if we made this change, we'd still have a 180-day growing season, but now we're only in there for 15 days, right? So we have a 165-day recovery period. Okay? So which of those pastures is probably going to be healthier over time? Well, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that the longer we can allow pastures to recover without the presence of grazing animals, generally the healthier those pastures are going to be. So we're going to have as we did this change, we're going to have a longer recovery period. We're going to increase the uniformity of graze. Okay. What do you think as we look down across this pasture when we're riding across it that's been grazed in this way compared to the one that we started with the first time? Would you guys agree we're going to see less bare ground? And I would certainly say that's going to be the case, okay? Because as we graze those plants more uniformly, we're going to see that bare ground start to shrink. So those plants are going to have more of that covering the ground. When we have less bare ground, that means we're going to increase water infiltration. Okay? Meaning of the rain that falls, more of it's going to get in the ground. When we have bare ground, what happens is that raindrop hits that bare soil and then it runs off. Okay, or it runs down past the rooting zones of those plants. So speaking of that, if we have a longer rest period, that's going to result in deeper rooted plants. Okay? Because that rest period is directly correlated with the rooting depth of those plants. Okay? Uniformity of graze, as we get better at uniformity of graze, we can increase our harvest efficiency. Okay? Meaning that we can put more of that total feed that grew in the belly of a grazing animal and still have good land health. Okay? And we're going to talk about that for a little bit. Bare ground, as we do that, we're going to, as we decrease bare ground, those landscapes become more drought resistant. Okay. Sorry about my bad handwriting there. More drought resistant. You think about that as there's more bare ground, that sun heats it, and the soil temperature just goes up, right? With that bare ground exposed. So there's lots of benefits of doing this. Now we're here to talk about economics. So let's do some economic projections on these. Now, We don't have time to dive into a lot of the nuances on this today, so I'm just going to give some of it to you. But this harvest efficiency piece, now we were at, find myself a spot to write.
Alice, we have another question.
Yes.
Okay, out of 640 acres, divided 160 acres into 40 paddocks and placing 175 cattle for 3 to 5 days, is this economically feasible and allow the land to recover faster? Can we graze twice a year, like December and April?
Can you run through those numbers again? I missed them.
A 680 or 640 acres divided into 160 acres into 40 paddocks, placing 175 cattle for 3 to 5 days. They're asking if it's economically feasible to allow the land to recover faster, and can they graze it twice a year, say December and April?
Okay, yeah, that's good questions. Somebody's really thinking through how to apply this. The answer is I don't know, because I don't know where you're living and what your precip zones are. I can give you some rules of thumb. A good rule of thumb to work from is for every 10 inches of precip that you receive, you can get 1 growing season grazing. Okay. Now this is in kind of the latitudes that we operate here. So what that would mean is if we get 15 inches of precip where we are, okay, then we'll get about 1.5 growing season grazings a year, which means 1.5, the pastures that we're in early in the growing season, April, May, maybe even early June, we can come back and hit those again late in the growing season. So if we're somewhere in May, it's reasonable to expect we'll get another grazing in September, right? As you get into the 30 and 40 inch precip zones, you can expect to get 3 and sometimes 4 grazings during the growing season. Okay? And then there's generally the opportunity to come back and graze another one at the end of the growing season. Okay. Now there's some exceptions to that rule. The principles that I want you to focus on are and that we teach in the school are these principles like stock densities, right? As we can increase stock densities, we can increase the uniformity of graze. Now, all of these rules have an economic threshold. Let's pick, for example, not far from us is the Red Desert, Wyoming, where they get 8 inches of precip a year. You can't economically justify, I haven't been able to, maybe somebody else can. I haven't been able to economically justify going in and developing the Red Desert in 8 inches of precip in 40-acre grazing cells, right? I mean, you just can't justify the water and the fencing and the management that it would take in that low precip environment. But as you get into these higher precipitation environments, it's easy to justify a lot more paddocks, and paddocks is another word for pasture, paddocks and water development and those things. So everybody's situation is going to be unique. What we teach is we teach principles that work in any environment. And then we give people the tools to take those principles and apply them in their environment and to figure out for themselves, does this economically work? This example that we're working through, they gave us their gross margin on their cows. Okay, that's an important piece of information because let's say somebody's gross margin is, well, I just wrote an article about this yesterday. Let's say your gross margin is negative. Okay. Let's say for every cow you run, you actually lose money. Well, and somebody hasn't actually taken the time to figure that out, and they go and they develop their grazing and they run more cows. Okay, well, what's going to happen to their business? They're actually going to go broke faster. Okay, so you need to know your gross margin in order to know what you can economically justify. That's kind of a bad answer because there's a lot of it depends in there, but I want to give you an accurate answer as well. So. Thanks, Catherine. I'll pause. Any other follow-up on that? Okay, sounds good. Well, then let's push on. Okay, so we've got all these things going on that are good for the land, right? So as we increase the rest period, as we increase the stock density, we're going to see deeper rooted plants, more uniformity of grazing, less bare ground, more drought resistant plants, more water infiltration. We could add things like we're going to increase the vigor of those plants. With the longer rest, those plants are going to be healthier and more vigorous. So we started off at that 25% harvest efficiency. Okay? And that would be for those longer graze periods. And in the case we had, it was a 60-day graze period. Okay. Really, for anything longer than about a 30-day grace period, we're probably going to be operating at that 25% harvest efficiency on rangeland environments. Okay. As we made this development here, now this development wasn't free. We had to spend some money on fencing, on some water development in order to do this. But as we made this development, we're going to put more of that feed in the belly of these grazing animals. Okay. Now we've got some formulas and things we teach in our class, but I'll give you the number here. It's going to be about 35% harvest efficiency when we move to this 15-day graze period. Okay. So you can see that goes up 10%, but moving from putting 25% of the total feed in a pasture in the belly of a cow to putting 35% of the total feed in that pasture in the belly of a cow. Okay, that's actually a 40% increase in the number of grazing days. Okay. Okay, we're actually going to put 40% more feed in the belly of that grazing animal. Okay. So let's pull this all back in and do some math. And I need to create myself some space here. So I'm going to do a little erasing. All right. There we go. Okay, so we got 40% more in the belly of those. Now, we started this example saying this ranch had 400 cows. Okay. And those cows had a gross margin of $425 per head was their gross margin per head. Okay. So if we increase it 40%, okay. So I'm going to take those 400 cows times 1.4, and that gives me 560 cows. 560 cows that I'm grazing on the same land, okay? Same land. And that land is actually getting healthier while I'm doing this, okay? Times the $425. They have the same gross margin. Gross margin hasn't changed. 560 of them times the $425 gross margin. I'm now generating $238,000 to put towards overheads. Okay. So the economic leverage of grazing management, by getting good at my grazing, by building soil health, by giving those plants longer rest periods, by having those graze periods shorter with higher stock densities, okay, I'm able to run more animals on the existing set of overheads. Now let me back up here to where we started on our letter. Okay. So we were at 420 cows. We went to that total overheads we produced by making those changes took us to 238,000, didn't it? Yeah. In terms of dollars that we generated. And what did we say they needed? They needed $225,000 a year to cover overheads. Okay. So that leaves them a little over $10,000 left over. Okay. So now we're $10,000 in the black. Okay. Was that a $10,000 improvement? No, they were losing $55,000 a year, and now they're making $10,000 a year. Okay. So that was a net change of $60,000, a little bit more than $60,000. Okay. Now, was that free? Absolutely not. We're going to have to spend some money on some fencing and water development and getting good at our grazing. Are changes like this, have I seen these done? Yes, absolutely. Okay. In fact, I think this is pretty conservative. There's been some ranches when they get good at their grazing are able to see a much more dramatic increase than what we've budgeted for here. So the point I want to leave you with is look for the principles. What are the principles here? And what we're talking about is combining herds, running fewer herds on your existing set of pastures, looking for pastures that would allow themselves to easily be split, spend some money on some water development, on building capacity of that water to handle larger herds. And in doing so, getting those longer rest periods, shorter graze periods, And these things will really start to come together. You start building some of that soil health. So I want to wrap up with a video showing you one of our clients who's applied some of this stuff and letting him tell you some of the results that they've seen. So we were playing around with this earlier. In order to do it, I had to change my audio settings here. So let me do that. All right. And Catherine, as I start playing this, if you could give me a thumbs up if you can hear Mike. And here we go.
Mike Livingston, we are 30 miles northwest of Burlington on the Republican River. What we do is we run a cow-calf operation, and essentially we run a little over 1,000 head of cows, and we keep all of our replacements. But we run the cows in 3 different herds, approximately 300, 400 head per herd, and we'll move those cows generally every 3 or 4 days, depending on the size of the pastures. But we run a planned grazing system. We AI all the cows. That creates a little bit more challenge, but it also makes it a little less challenging with having as many older bulls around. But anyway, it's worked very well for us, and we've improved our pastures dramatically. That's why we were able to carry our steers over and all of our heifers over. Our precip is about 16 to 17 inches a year. We've never got that much, but that's the average. But anyway, our pastures will rest. Some pastures will get grazed twice during the growing season. Some will get grazed once. And the ones that get grazed twice are the ones that we hit really early in April and May when we're calving. And then depending on the year, but we'll come back into them. It'll be July or later, maybe August. And then some of them will only get grazed once, and then we'll come back in and winter grazing on them. Well, the reason we did it was originally we bought the main part of the ranch, and it had been abused, and we did not stock it the way it had been run in the past. I mean, our numbers were way down, and we were trying to manage it and build it back, and we really didn't know what we were doing. We thought we did. NRCS tried to help me, but they couldn't because I knew everything. I've changed some since then and realized how little I knew. But anyway, the kicker was we bought an additional part to it, and we started out over there running, I think, 220 head of cows. And it had been running more than that, but we was going to run fewer cows and help the grass. And anyway, at the end of the year, we come in, we had no grass. We had sagebrush and sand. I mean, it just was sand in between sagebrush with a little bit of grama grass around the sagebrush plant. So the next year I said, well, we can't run as many cows. So we run 200 head of cows over there. And that fall we gathered, and we had the same thing. We had no grass. So the next year I said, we got to cut way back. So we put 160 cows there. Had close to normal rainfall. That fall we came in, we had no grass. And I said, it doesn't make sense. We're not gaining, it's not getting any better. And I'd been interested in the Ranching for Profit School for a long time. I had seen their ads, and I had one person that I kind of knew that went to it. He was an accountant, and he'd encouraged me to go. And I thought, well, of course, accountant would learn something at Ranching for Profit, but I didn't need to because I knew everything about ranching. But anyway, I realized that maybe there was more to learn about grass, and I signed up for the Ranching for Profit School, and I went to that. And it literally changed my life, and it changed the way I seen things. It changed what we look at on a daily basis and how we see it. The removal of paradigms is unbelievable, the power of that and what it'll do for you. So when I come back with that, I had a new plan, and we started putting in electric fences, and we started rotational grazing. It didn't all go the way they said it would in the book. But we started that in 2012. Worst drought we ever had. And that was the first year that we calved later. We had lots of problems and we questioned ourselves and we thought that, why did we do this? But we stuck with it and we stuck with it through that drought. And then we started seeing the improvements and we got through the bad times. And now you couldn't get me to go back to continuous grazing.
Back on audio, Catherine?
Yes.
Okay. So just to wrap up, I think it's so much more useful to hear it from somebody like Mike that has been doing it and having success doing it. He'd mentioned that the changing in grazing had allowed them to not only run their cows, but also to keep all their yearlings from all those animals. So all those calves, they were able to keep them over and run more, and essentially added another enterprise to that existing land base on that same ranch. So as we wrap up here, I want to transition to see if there's any questions left, but just some ways, if you guys want more on these kind of things, if you go on our website, we put out twice a month, we put out a newsletter that's the profit tips articles, and those are free to subscribe for. You just put your email in there and they land in your email inbox. That's what I was talking about. I wrote that profit tips article on recently. We have a free series of 10 lessons that you can sign up for that we call the first steps. And that's 10 emails that you get that have some different videos like what you heard from Mike and other things that come and land in your inbox. We've got a YouTube channel, we've got a Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, all those kind of things. There's books and DVDs you can order from our website. And then of course, Mike mentioned about taking the Ranching for Profit School. We'd love to have people come to that. Once you come, a lot of people come back for a second time. And then we've got our Executive Link program for alumni of that. So I'll stop talking here and see if there's any more questions that have come through while we've been going, Catherine.
Okay, I don't see any new questions. We do need to remind the audience that for the second half of your presentation, they need to log out of this session and go into the next session that will start on the top of the hour. We'd like to give a big thanks out to our sponsors of the IAC conference. This session is sponsored by our Champions of Native Agriculture sponsors. And your presentation is so eye-opening. The one thing I thought about when you were talking is it's kind of like mowing your lawn. Like if you do it real even, and then allow it to grow, that it thickens up, it gets healthier. I noticed that this summer during COVID, staying home and being here and actually taking care of my lawn, that it hasn't looked this good in probably 20 years. But I was here managing it and taking care of it the way it should have been. And I haven't done that for a long time. So that's kind of what I equated it to.
Good. I like it. Good analogy. All
so
right.
I don't see any other questions have come in for us. So we've got about, oh wait, hang on a second. Okay, what can you do when your tribal leases stop you from changing fences or changing your grazing plans?
Yeah, that's a great question. We work with quite a few clients that are constricted in their management in terms of what they can do because of a lease agreement. And there are times when those are really things that are out of your control, right? You really can't control those. But we have seen some people who have been successful at restructuring some of those lease agreements. And there's one gentleman I'm thinking of who has a lease agreement with a pretty traditional group that's pretty hard to change. And what they did is they said, well, instead of saying this number of head for this long, we're going to focus on land health objectives. And we're going to agree that we want the land to look a certain way. And we want, the amount of bare ground to be this. And so they put it really based on the outcome rather than prescribing the procedure, right? And so when he had that in place, now he was free to put in some better grazing management and to up his numbers and get even better results for the people. So sometimes those things that can feel very like they're out of your control, sometimes there are pieces of that are within your control. So I'd encourage you to look at that and find those pieces that are.
And tribal members, you need to start having bigger conversations with your tribal leadership. They do have some authority to make changes, to help you and benefit you. If you can bring information like this forward, showing the benefits to the land, the benefits to the livestock, all of the benefits, it helps them understand where you're coming from and how the tribe and the tribal producers can profit, and not only monetarily but profit by managing their land so much better. It's just a learning process. You have to teach your tribal leadership because they don't know. The bottom line is they don't know unless they're in an ag background, but the majority of them aren't. We also need to start pressuring the BIA offices as well, to help get out there and help the producers. There's a lot of things that we can do if we get out there and learn. Out here in the Northwest, we have a lot of cereal grain production. So every spring, like here on the Umatilla Reservation, there's thousands of acres of volunteer wheat that looks as good as the wheat crop that's coming in that are sprayed. It's just killed. Everything that you're talking about, putting in the electric fences, hauling in the water, can all be done. I've talked to the Portland area office, Bureau of Indian Affairs. They're saying all you have to do is amend your conservation plan to allow that in the lease, for the cereal grain production. You have to get a grazing rate established. But there's ways to do things, and so many people at the tribal level, it almost sometimes seems like they don't want to get out of that rut that they're in. It's always been this way, it's going to stay this way. But until you kind of make some noise and fuss around a little bit, it'll stay that way. But just get in there and ask the people that can do something. And that's what I've found out this way.
I appreciate those comments.
Oh, here's another question. We are thinking of using seed blocks with yellow clover seeds for cattle to eat to try to recover lands that have been overgrazed. Is this a good idea?
I think there's probably some merit to it. I would caution that a lot of our lands are more native lands that have been overgrazed. The thing that's not a lack of seeds is not what's holding them back. So if you actually went out on native rangeland and went under those bare ground surfaces, you would find a lot of good seeds that are already out there. It's the thing that I see that's holding them back is giving them the opportunity for those seeds to germinate and then to grow without the presence of grazing animals there. So essentially lengthening the rest periods for those places will often cause that seeding to occur naturally. But yeah, the presence of some of those species like the clovers and things like that, it sure won't hurt. But I don't think that the lack of seeds is often what's holding them back. It's generally a lack of a good rest period.
Well, I don't see any more questions.
All right. Well, maybe that'll give us a few minutes to get logged into the next meeting and be ready to go at 1 o'clock. So I hope some of you will come over there and join us. We're going to dive more into the economics of the business on that side.
Thank you for participating with us today. We hope to see you in the next